Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
Hello, listeners. This is Dion Mitchell here with Mehul and Jaria. Today, we are going to discuss the use of DNA in the recent arrest of the man believed to be the Golden State Killer and East Area Rapist.
It's been a few months now, but back on April 24th of 2018, Mr. Joseph James DeAngelo was arrested at his home. And based on DNA, he was identified as the Golden State Killer / East Area Rapist. I think you might have another couple other names you'll discuss. But really, before we get into the DNA, which was kind of the headline of this, Dion, why don't you tell us a little bit about DeAngelo's background and what the crimes were that he allegedly committed?
This is what we got. His name is James DeAngelo, and he's also known as the Golden State Serial Killer. He was also a rapist, a burglar who committed at least 12 murders. Alleged 12 murders, more than 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries. I mean, that is a full-time job.
That's prolific.
Right there. Other nicknames, which we mentioned, are East Area Rapist and the Diamond Knot Killer, which you can probably go into later in the discussion, but I had not heard that name.
I hadn't either, actually. That's news to me.
Yeah, all of his crimes took place in California from 74 to 86. Joseph was born November 8th, 1945 in Bath, New York. He's 72. He had a wife, Sharon Huddle. They were married in 73. He had one brother and three sisters. And as far as I know, his parents were still married, and that was Kathleen Bosanko and James Joseph DeAngelo Sr. Authorities charged the 72-year-old former police officer DeAngelo with 8 counts of first-degree murder, based on DNA evidence on April 24, 2018. This was the first announcement connecting the ransacker crimes to the Golden State Killer. Due to the California statute of limitations on pre-2017 rape cases, DeAngelo cannot be charged with the 1970 rapes.
Well, and also I just wanted to add, the guy was an ex-cop.
Yeah,
which really adds to it. And then we'll talk a little bit, I actually printed out the arrest warrant and the search warrant, and it's interesting. It tells you the whole history, but part of the way of associating him as a suspect is, he had to be the right age, of course, but he had to be in the right geographical location. So as you look at when he went to his different police officer jobs, it really jived with where the crimes were being committed.
Every now and again, there's these crimes that go on for a long time, and I don't know the hard numbers on this, but it seems like a lot of them are just hiding in plain sight.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
you and I, and maybe we'll talk about this in another episode, but we talked about the murder data, how they track that, how they track the geography, and there's a lot of clues you can get from that.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if you are tracking that, you'll be able to see, like they say, numbers don't lie.
Yeah, I should say that's called the Murder Accountability Project, and is it murderdata.org is the site?
Yeah, that's right.
You can go in there and play, and you can be an amateur sleuth and try to find another serial killer.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know, it's hard to get your head around, the guy was a police officer, and because the last thing that you would do would be to track a cop and where he's going, and that's actually how they were able to grab him, is to be able to match his stops to these crime scenes.
When you think about it, other than a CSI person like a Dexter, a fictional Dexter, who better to know how to get away with crime than a police officer?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, let's dig in on this. I'm sure as a DNA expert, I bet you're sick of discussing, cases like this.
Yeah,
in this particular case.
On one hand, it's now July of 2018, so his arrest is old news, but really what's just beginning now is the discussion about our genetic privacy and these open source genealogy databases. And every day there's a new thought leader weighing in about it or bringing up new issues. And so we're getting more and more details about what exactly went down. Like I mentioned, the search warrant was just released, I think, just a few weeks ago. And really, this great debate of genetic privacy is just caught fire.
Yeah, that's actually why you and I discussed, doing this topic, even though, it is a little bit late in the game.
Right.
But as we move forward with the details of this case, it's really bringing up a lot of privacy issues and securing DNA and using private companies to do it, and that apply to everybody,
exactly.
Not just if you're a criminal.
Yeah, very true.
So let's get into the DNA aspect of this. You mentioned that on the day of DeAngelo's arrest that a number of reporters reached out to you.
Yeah, and that's because there was a lot of very sketchy information that was released. We knew that through some discarded trash that there was a DNA link that had identified a strong suspect for the Golden State Killer. And you think about that, you're like, well, wait a minute, why are they picking through his trash? If he was a suspect, why didn't they have a sample from him? If in the typical use of a DNA database. So the standard DNA database is CODIS, that's managed by the FBI. And so, if you get a hit on there, you then have probable cause to get a sample directly from the person. So to me, this rang true as a familial search type case. And I immediately thought of the Grim Sleeper case back in 2010. So let's just get a little bit of background about databases. So the idea is crime lab, let's say there's a rape case. Crime lab gets a nice DNA profile from a semen sample. They enter it into CODIS, right? If you hit on somebody who's in the database, you then have probable cause to go get a sample from that person, get another sample and confirm it, and then it's a done deal. Well, one of the basic tenets of DNA is that the more closely related we are, the more similar our DNA is. So you might have a situation where you take, just going back to that rape case, you search that semen DNA profile in CODIS and you don't hit on anybody, but you notice that there's a couple people in there who are really similar to that profile. So now you want to sort of get at, could it be a relative? So Grim Sleeper was a prolific case in South LA. And what happened there was they had DNA from many of the crime scenes. There were several murders. I don't remember the grand total. They put it in CODIS. They didn't get a direct hit, but they hit on somebody similar. They started looking at that and said, you know what, this could be, the person in the database could be the son of the killer. So what they had to do is they had to stake out dad, and he actually was at a birthday party at a pizza place. And so the cops went there, posed as waiters, picked up some of his utensils, plates, all that kind of stuff, tested that, compared it to the crime scene evidence from years past, and boom, they got a hit. So I immediately thought that this Golden State Killer was that, and I would have put my money on that. Well, we found out that it was sort of that, but actually the match wasn't through the traditional CODIS. It was through an open source genealogy database. And at the time of the arrest, we didn't know the specifics exactly as to what was tested or exactly how that DNA association was made.
Well, on the one hand, by the investigators, it was genius. On the other hand, applications for all of us, it's scary.
Yes, absolutely.
So why don't you talk about, kind of maybe some of the, top shelf implications of, being able to go to an open source and what that could mean just, for your job and everyday life.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of how this actually went down. And we didn't know that until they arrested the search warrant and the arrest warrant. And you can go download the whole PDF. Now, you're going to see a lot of black marks in it. And this is typical for discovery in criminal cases. It's been redacted. So you're not going to get all the info, but you're going to get the key ideas. And so basically, when the police had targeted DeAngelo, we'll get into how they got there, they went and followed him to the Hobby Lobby, and he parked his car there, and they swabbed his door handle because, of course, if, touch DNA, we're in the era of touch DNA, you touch something, you leave behind enough DNA. So they went and swabbed the driver's door handle. They run back to the lab, and what they found was a mixture of three people. Not uncommon. Anybody who touches that door handle, they might leave some DNA. But there was one profile that was not really a major profile, but there was a significant amount from one person. Well, when they compared that one person in the mixture to their crime scene evidence, they concluded that, basically the DNA types in this evidence are about 10 billion times more likely if that person is the same person in the evidence from the Golden State Killers. So they took it a step further. They went to his house, staked out his garbage can, and they pulled a bunch of items from there. And really only one item gave them usable DNA information, and that was a tissue from the trash can. Well, they got a nice DNA profile. Their likelihood ratio was now 47.5 septillion. So that was astronomical. So based on that, they said, all right, boom, we can easily get a search warrant. Let's go arrest this guy. And obviously when they pulled a sample directly from Mr. DeAngelo, they had a direct hit, and the case is potentially solved. If you look at how they actually got to DeAngelo, which is, I guess that's the headline here, in one of the cases, there was a homicide in Ventura County back late 80s, early 80s, late 1970s. And the medical examiner in that case, who collected the rape kit from the female victim, he had the foresight to say, you know what, I should actually collect 2 rape kits so I have double the amount of samples, because you never know what's going to happen in the future. And as I read in an article recently, the future's now in DNA. And because they had that extra DNA, they went and did this genealogy testing. And so through the genealogy testing, they developed Mr. DeAngelo as a suspect. Now, it ain't that easy. They had to do a lot of legwork, and something that doesn't get brought up that often is that they had 2 false hits before they got to DeAngelo. One of them was a 72-year-old man in a nursing home in Oregon. So he played out as a good suspect. He was the right age. They pulled DNA from him, and it wasn't him. So this is the danger of this less exact type of DNA matching. It goes to exactly what you said, Dion. You got to pound the pavement and do the detective work to go with it.
What do you think this means going forward? A lot of times when you're on the stand, you're on the other end of this, but going forward, collecting the DNA this way, outsourcing the matching process, how is this going to set some kind of a new standard going forward?
It is for sure. And the problem is that the problem in my opinion, the CODIS is very, very strongly regulated, that database. It's managed by the FBI. And this business of familial searching, like in the Grim Sleeper, you have to go through a lot of permission to be allowed to do that, because they understand that if you start, hitting on 10, 20, 30, 40 people, you've kind of lost what the benefit of DNA is, which is to zoom in on a particular person. And
well, there's also potential I could see for abuses. Absolutely.
So the thing that's scary about this genealogy is it's now the wild, wild west. So in my opinion, let's use all the tools possible to catch the bad guys. I agree with that too.
Well, yeah, because at the end of the day, you like to have the DNA because you want to catch the right person that's responsible for the crime. But at the same time, like you mentioned, it is the wild, wild west. And I think there's a little bit of a window here where I think agencies, because of the vagueness of this right now, are going to take they're going to take as much advantage of this process as they can until some legal standards are set.
Yeah. And if you want to focus on like a legal comparison, I read a great article recently that whereas when you talk about searching things, you have the concept of third-party consent. So like my cell phone records, I don't really have a reasonable expectation of privacy because I know that law enforcement will subpoena them and AT&T will give them up. But with genealogy, because the database is not hitting on the defendant, it's hitting on a relative, this is actually fourth-party consent. So it's not like the third party. We've never seen anything like this. So we've got to develop all kinds of rules and protections in order to make this truly beneficial.
Yeah, and that won't happen until it's challenged.
Exactly. So the defense lawyers are just chopping at the bit on this one.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how it plays out in the Golden State Killer trial.
Yeah, and so one concern is most people they know Ancestry, they know 23andMe. There's a couple other of the big boys, the big ethnicity type ancestry testing companies, and so they'll say that, hey, listen, we're not going to give up this data to law enforcement unless there's a search warrant. So you kind of know what you're dealing with there. But now this one that potentially solved Golden State Killer, it's GED match. It is open source. And so the idea is that if you've already had your DNA tested from one of the commercial agencies, you can take that raw data, you can upload it into GED match. And the point of that is to try to see, hey, can I find any of my relatives out there? So it's really more for hobby than anything else. And there's something like, I think 800,000 users of GED match. So this is a big database. And my understanding is that it's kind of seen as the clearinghouse for trying to find your genetic relatives, because you can use data from all of the big companies and it all sort of talk to each other within this database.
I think you mentioned that there's already been some fallout of this. So obviously, the genie's out of the bottle if you've already uploaded, and obviously if hopefully you didn't commit any crimes and you don't
right.
You don't have anything to worry about. But I wonder what the impact going forward will be for people just for privacy concerns.
Well, I know
not be willing to put their DNA samples up.
Yeah, it's interesting with GED match. I think they're talking to the founder who was saying that, hey, listen, now we just flat out say that this might be used by law enforcement, but they also say a lot of people left because of that. On the other hand, a lot of people say, you know what? If I can contribute to the betterment of society, I know I didn't do anything. Hey, if one of my distant relatives is a creep,
right,
let's get him off the street. We're good with that. But there are other open databases that I know for a fact have actually shut down. They said, forget it. We don't want to deal with law enforcement and privacy and lawsuits. And they just said, forget it.
Well, that was actually kind of more my point, is that they're just not going to want to have the liability out there. And, of course, there's going to be, like I said, you could see it coming down the track. There's a potential for the police or any agency to abuse it. Then they go snooping around. That gets posted. Someone is either, wrongly accused, wrongly besmirched, whatever the case is. Of course, they, legal up and then sue the DNA company, and then everybody's jumping on board.
Yeah, you're going to sue the deep pockets. You're not going to sue the police department. You're going to sue these companies who may be tied to big, genetic companies with deep pockets.
Right.
And so just to understand how this works, if you've never done like an Ancestry or a 23andMe, they give you a vial that you put a bunch of spit in it. So that's really the only way you can submit a sample to those commercial entities. So I can't just take a tissue out of my trash, send it to 23andMe and say, tell me about this. So that's kind of the protection there. And even with the GED match, again, or DNA from someone who you're legal guardian for or who has your authorization. So then the question is, how did they take this DNA profile, that law enforcement, how did they legitimately put that on GED match? And the investigator will say flat out in the newspaper, he used an undercover profile. So could a defense attorney work with that? I suppose, but is that really going to fly, considering the other side as to the benefit of this match? I don't think so.
Right. I always wonder about the corporate side of this as well. You and I had talked about this. What are the corporate implications of this? So like, say, for example, I go to a job interview and a guy offers me a glass of water. I take a sip from it. He grabs my DNA. They send it off to the lab and see if I'm predisposed for cancer
yep.
or other things. It's so you don't even know that that's the reason that you weren't hired.
Yes.
But they don't want to see they don't want to hire somebody that could be a insurance liability 5 years from now.
Yeah, you're 100% right. That this could be. It's not just solving crimes. It's the potential for genetic discrimination, just as you mentioned. In fact, I remember a few years ago.
Wait, that's a great term, though. You could see this. You could see this in a headline down the road. I was genetically discriminated against.
Yeah, and you think about. What year did that movie Gattaca come out?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're there. That was probably
Yeah.
15 years ago, and
Yeah,
now that's not so crazy. I remember having a couple years ago, I had a pizza delivered, and I just struck up a conversation with the delivery guy, and hey, what do you do? DNA, blah blah blah. And he's like, yeah, it's that database really concerns me and privacy, and I'm against it. And I said, well, here's the thing: the credit card that you just took. Okay, if I take that and swab it, I can get your DNA. It's just that easy if you really want to get it. Like you say, you go to a job interview and someone swabs your water bottle. It's just that easy because the DNA testing is so sensitive. Doesn't take much.
Yeah. Speaking of the pizza, wasn't that how didn't they call it the pizza murders? It was in Maryland or right outside DC. And,
the Domino's pizza box.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you remember that case?
Absolutely. Yeah. I actually talked to Inside Edition about that. And it was pizza DNA from a pizza box. I guess the killer, made himself at home and had pizza, and that was his downfall. Now, that one I think was a conventional either database hit or directly to him. But yeah, I mean, here's the thing. You think about when you think about privacy and this idea of the third party and all that, the question is, do you have a reasonable expectation of privacy? If you and I share an apartment and the cops think I'm a suspect and you say, hey, go ahead and look at the apartment, well, I didn't really have a reasonable expectation of privacy because I know that you share that as well. But, a DNA, gone are the days where someone has to stick a needle in your arm and draw blood. It's all over the place. So it's not invasive to get DNA, and we'll have to start looking at trash and all that. And what's the ruling on that? Is that a lawful search or what? So it's kind of cool. It's like a new frontier, not just for science and criminal justice, but for the legal interpretation.
I have a question about that. Let's say an officer gets a search warrant. Is carving out gathering DNA?
Yes. It's always there. It's like also permission to take an oral swab from such and such person, based on all these other facts.
But what about just from the house? Let's say not from the person or apartment, whatever the location is. So when a search warrant is served,
yeah, because they'll say, hey, any evidence from this, that, the other. Yeah, absolutely. And they may say, hey, looking for bloody clothes, looking for this, looking for that. You have to write it carefully, of course, but that's pretty commonplace, getting some source of DNA from someone's residence.
And then they can now, where does that go? Can they put it into the base? Can they log it? Or is that just, it's actually conviction, right? It can only be uploaded post conviction, right?
Well, see, you bring up a good point. Even if you talk about the more down the line database, CODIS, you can't just put every sample known to man in there. So if there's a rape case, you have to ask the victim, did you have consensual sex within the last 72 hours? And if so, you've got to get a DNA sample from the partner, because if you get this DNA sample and it's the partner, you can't just go throwing that in the database. You're only looking for the unknown person. Or if there's a crime scene in a very public place, say like a concert venue, and there's just all kinds of beer bottles all over the place and cigarette butts, and no reason to believe that any one of them is related to the offense than any others, you can't just start swabbing a bunch of them and throwing them in CODIS and having a party.
Right.
So that's why I say that the CODIS is highly regulated. There's all these rules and regulations that we just don't have for a lot of this genealogy stuff.
No, and that's why, once again, it's why I thought the detectives, it was genius to not go to CODIS, just to go out to, an outsourced, genealogy or DNA company.
Yeah, and I should say that in addition to obviously running the Golden State Killer samples in CODIS, they did try to do a familial search in CODIS. They tried that a couple of times. So they were really at a dead end. And when I heard about this whole genealogy thing, I thought, okay, well, listen, I'm glad the guy's off the street, all that. But as a guy who works a lot of defense, my hackle went up immediately. But when you hear about the work that went on in the background before they actually went and, swabbed DeAngelo's car and all that, there's a lot of whittling down that has to be done. So I know they spent, I don't know, I thought I heard maybe like 3 months or something, and, building family trees and eliminating people. So, I mean, the idea is you take this crime scene DNA, you put it in this database, you say, all right, here's some possible close relatives, okay? You got to, again, if they were 2 years old at the time of the offenses, they're out. If they're the wrong gender, they're out. So you have to do all this kind of stuff. You have to look, where did they live? There's a lot of digging that goes on. So it's really a marrying of the genetics and the good old-fashioned detective work. So in a way, maybe there's nothing new under the sun. This is just another way to get the ball rolling.
You know, our follow-up on this is going to be when the movie's made.
Yeah,
I mean, there's all the elements here for a Lifetime movie or a feature of how they were able to track this guy down. I want to go back to one thing. What was the angle of the reporters that contacted you about this case?
They were actually pretty clueless. You know, like I say, they're like, well, what does this mean exactly? Why isn't it just a direct match or whatever? So when I started talking,
so you had to kind of educate them first, so
absolutely.
They could understand it.
So I had to tell them about just even how the CODIS works or how the Grim Sleeper, you know, they never heard of that. It's really just kind of like the basics.
Wow.
And so this is advanced because this type of genealogy, this is not done in the typical crime lab case. This is really a different type of DNA testing. And I don't want to get way too deep in it, and it's actually not my specialty, but we have multiple types of DNA. So, males all have a Y chromosome. And so the Y chromosome DNA is the same among paternal relatives. So if you looked at my YSTR profile, it's the same as my dad, the same as paternal grandfather. So you can trace a lineage way back that way. Flip side is mitochondrial DNA. That's all maternal relatives have. So my grandma passed on her mitochondrial DNA to my mom. She passed it to me. My aunt has it, so this is a way you can trace back. And then if you look at the DNA that's not on the X and Y chromosomes or that's not mitochondrial, that's called autosomal. And so when you're looking at this, hey, what's my ancestry? I'm 10% that, 20% that. They look at points in that autosomal DNA and just try to figure out, hey, is this consistent with this type of ancestry, or are you sharing a big cluster of DNA with other people that would infer that you're a relative? So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about here. It's probably a good point for us to wrap up. But I mean, hopefully when people listen to this, it'll give them some pause before they say, oh, yeah, here's my DNA and here's my spit sample.
Well, let me give you one more anecdote about this whole ancestry and, how precise is it and all of that. And, we've all heard, take your sample to different companies. Will you get the same answer? And invariably you don't. And just like a lot of DNA, this is all based on statistics, probability, and databases. In fact, my wife is big into this. What percent am I this, that? Well, she just got an email a few weeks ago from the company that she used and said, you know what? We're going to change your percentages around. We got some new information. And she was actually a little bit disappointed. So it just depends on how much data you have at the time, and things will get more and more focused.
Wow.
All right. So that's enough science, I guess.
That's good. I think it's a great spot to end.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter @Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.